is Adrienne Herron. I'm the Knowledge Translation and Transfer Specialist for the Alberta AgriSystems Living Lab. I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Kahlon and Rob Dunn with us this evening, but I'm going to take a moment to acknowledge that the members of the Alberta AgriSystems Living Lab team are grateful to live, work, and be in relation with people from across many traditional territories covering all of Alberta. This acknowledgement is to reaffirm our commitment and our responsibility to improving the relationships and our own understanding of local Indigenous people, their cultures, and their knowledge. And so with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Kahlon. She currently lives in the Greater Edmonton area, and she works for Alberta Pulse Growers as their Research Program Manager and Farm Scale Research Lead. She finished her graduate work or graduate education from the University of Alberta and the University of Florida. And her work portfolio encompasses creating and implementing research programs for the organization via plot to field farm scale research program. And also joining us this evening, we're excited to have Rob Dunn with us. He's the cropping system specialist with FarmWise. And prior to that, he did spend a few years working for Alberta Agriculture and Rural Development. And he also works with us and some of our producers who have projects with us with the Living Lab. So with all of that mouthful, I'm going to hand it over to Jagrup. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jagrup, and some of you already know me. However, for someone new face, I've been working with Alberta Pulse Growers from past 6 years. And not only I'm the research program manager, but I'm also a farmer at heart. So I really love interaction with farmers and in general talking about what we're going on at Alberta Pulse. Let's get it rolling. So what I wanted to talk about today is the intercropping with pulses, and that's something that I'm currently working on in the plot to field program as well. And Rob is assisting me with it. As you will see a little bit more about the program, you'll understand his role and my role a little bit better. So let's talk about our prairie agriculture system and intercropping in general. So intercropping has been around since ancient times. You can divulge into history maybe 500 years ago and you would find intercropping as well, and even further away. So the research on potential intercropping benefits, especially related to resource use efficiency, cropping system resilience, the reduced use of external synthetic inputs via fertilizers and management techniques, and improved forage and grain quality, and mitigation of adverse environmental effects that are associated with crop production. So right about in 1980s, there was a little bit of research into this happening in Western Canada particularly. However, the most work was done around pea with mustard and canola. So the reason being that they wanted to check if the stiff stems would help with lodging and easy harvest and quality of grain. However, as we came up with newer varieties that would stay upright and lodging wasn't a big issue anymore, the focus shifted from, let's try oats, maybe barley, maybe wheat can work with us. So stuff like that. However, other pulses such as fava beans have been tested with canola. Chickpeas have worked with flax. And there are other crops that have intercropping benefits with each other as well. So with that, I just wanted to bring an attention of why I even do this. So an example that comes to my mind is that canola does not have an association with mycorrhiza in the soil. However, pea does. None of the brassicas have that relationship. So mycorrhiza essentially helps you to pump phosphate from the soil. So if there's a legume, for example, a pea that's grown with canola, now suddenly you're leaving mycorrhizal associations for the upcoming crops, which may be such as wheat, which needs it. So that becomes a whole beneficial cycle and essentially helps the next crop, not just the current crop as well. So in addition to achieving some of the efficient land use efficiency, I'll talk about LER in a little bit more detail. Intercrops were also considered a little bit more efficient in utilizing other resources such as nutrients, light, water, and had some insect pest beneficial interactions as well. So this is a little chart that will tell you a little bit more focused on when a non-legume and a legume are grown together. There are certain interactions that are happening and certain things that you have to consider when you are setting your crop for that. However, long-term research has found out that the ones that are dashed lines aren't that interacting with each other. So growing a legume and a non-legume will affect nitrogen availability and sometimes phosphorus availability. However, the major chunk of gain from this will be towards the non-legume crop. There's also other things that will play, what soil type you're growing in, the species that you're using, and other things. And we will discuss that in later slides as well. So it again goes back to the total land equivalent ratio, how this all plays. At the same time, there's also a challenge when you're thinking about such intercropping and benefits. There's an impact on existing crop rotations. Shortening rotation lengths can usually lead to increased disease incidence, considering that the crop rotation is an essential part of integrated disease management. So, such as like soil-borne diseases, I'll give an example of clubroot, Fusarium head blight, root rot impulses. There's also changes in insect pest population and beneficials that can happen. Determining optimum seeding rates is a problem. Sowing depths is a problem. So something will be seeding quite high on the soil and others will need a deeper seeding depth. Just coming at choice of equipment as well as what are your in-season herbicides, safe placement of fertilizers, staging for maturity. At the end of the harvest, the grain separation, which Rob will tell you is very, very annoying, and finding markets for such things. So just to summarize what I just talked about, there's a ton of things that are in play and interplay between each other. And if you only want to focus on nitrogen, which is usually the case when you're growing a pulse crop with the brassicaceae, there's not just nitrogen itself, it's the source of the nitrogen. The nitrogen, how would it, if it's going to benefit the next crop or is it benefiting the brassica right away? So all that plays a huge role. So we discussed with our farmers, there were a lot of projects that were coming our way for funding where they wanted to test intercropping in small plot research. However, we figured it out that a small plot research would not be ideal for a project like intercropping where there's so many things at play. So we used our field scale program, which is plot to field, to test a little bit more further about the land equivalent ratio and pea canola interactions. So we brainstormed an idea, talked about it. Okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to do? We needed farmers participating so that we can gain access to their actual fields. And we have like an agronomist on the field, such as Rob Dunn here. And I will be the scientist of the project. So we'll get the data, we'll analyze it, and we'll, with the help of agronomists, we'll be able to set it up in a farm. So this is what an example of a farm for me is. Here's my 3 replications for my research trial, and it's just a normal field for the farmer. So there are some changes that on each individual farm will have to bring because of this research idea. However, otherwise it's just normal cropping for them. What we as the scientific people have to take care of is the number of replications and total number of site years. And this is important because every year that you'll grow same stuff, it won't be the same environment, it won't be the same interactions, there will be different precipitation, maybe different in the soil tilt and etc. And it's very crucial to get data on year over year and many different sites to get a good solid idea of what's going on. So with this particular project that I'm going to talk about, the objectives were just to make it field scale, just discuss it with producers, help them with management decisions in this. And let's just see how the interactions among insects, beneficials, in general, the agronomics of growing a pea and a canola together, just compare them. What if they were grown singularly as usual versus when they were grown together? And that also with some variation in how much nitrogen they're getting. So we had 4 treatments. We set them up in randomized complete block design. They were replicated 3 times. So there was sole canola with the recommended nitrogen fertilizer rate. There was a low N rate intercrop, which meant 75% of pea seeding rate and 50% of canola. We did not apply any outside nitrogen other than what is already coming with the phosphorus fertilizer. Our third treatment was moderate nitrogen rate, 75% pea and 50% canola seeding rate with 50% of nitrogen applied. And then we compared it with a sole pea crop at the same nitrogen rate that was used for lower intercrop, which is the number 2. So now I wanted to tell you a little bit about land equivalent ratio in particular. So it compares the yield of sole crops and intercrops. So how we get this data is that there's a formula for this. I'm not going to bore you with the arithmetic at this time of the day, but land equivalent ratio is calculated, and then you figure out if it's greater than 1, it indicates the intercrop over yielded than the singular crop. And if it's less than 1, it indicates that intercrop yielded less than the sole crop. I would like you to keep this in mind because we're going to discuss the data later. So this is an example of our 2023 data that we got from 8 sites. The site names are right here: Acme, Falaire, Foremost, Manville, Mosley, Stone Plain, Three Hills, and Trochu. And here's your land equivalent ratio. So when we calculated it, we figured out that these green areas were where we found that there was a little bit interaction that was positive, whereas the red ones are the ones that we didn't find anything. There was an overyielding of the Piola crop, again at the 4 sites. Let me go back at those 4 and 5 sites here. So we saw that within Falaire, Foremost, Mosley, and Three Hills, there was an overyielding whenever intercrop was compared, which is like 50% of total because there's total 8 sites. However, we found that under yielding also happened at one of the Piola intercrops, and this site was Trochu in the red cell here. We didn't think there's any correlation between intercrop performance and growing season rainfall or yield potential. And there's an inconsistent trend that we saw. But however, this was only one single year worth of data. So we went on and repeated it in 2024. We're at the stage of collecting and analyzing data. So we've already completed second year of intercropping. My take-home message from this Piola intercrop is that it was not consistently better or worse than the sole pea and canola crop across the 8-year study in 2023. However, once we get the 2024 data as well analyzed, we'll have a 16 years worth of total data to talk about. Maybe there's a different picture, so stay tuned for that. However, the intercrop with moderate nitrogen fertilizers rate also reduced nodulation of pea and favored the canola plants, and it increased the percentage of canola in the harvested yield. So we did notice that a little bit of boost was helping canola more than pea based on a single growing season. So there's really insufficient data to make any recommendation here. However, I did wanted to share what we got out of this project. It's not just one project. We're looking at bigger picture here. So there's quite a few of small plot to field scale research projects that we're doing with this. We have a wonderful community of many farmers that participate with us every year. There's different teams that we're working with. Living Labs is one of our partners, as well as University of Alberta scientists who are looking into intercrop for light penetration, as well as looking at insects and pests and the beneficials and how are they interacting within those. So there's an enormous value add for consulting agronomists as well as participating farmers. And I just wanted to give you the bigger picture. It's a province-wide program. So there's unlimited ways of harnessing the data. So we're collecting it. Thank you. If there's any questions, I'd love to answer that. Or we can keep the questions to the last when Rob is also finished up with his portion of the talk. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Sorry, I went a little fast, but then I was like, I don't want to steal Rob's time.
All good.
Feel free to steal my time. Did you want to do questions?
We could do them at the end, Rob, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, that will be better, Rob, to do it at
okay. And I see that our friend Josh Fankhauser did join your group. So we have
awesome. We have him here. So great. Hi, Josh.
Hi, Josh.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Look. Okay. Yeah. And I know Josh may have to slip out because the kids are probably heading to bed here pretty soon. And they're just back from a trip to Mexico. So, yeah, no, it's a real real pleasure to be able to join you here tonight. And when your group had originally planned with Adrian for this, we had another farmer and he wasn't available here. He had to cancel for tonight. So I'm one of the limitations is sometimes on the practical side of these things, but let's jump in. I guess in terms of the practical side of where, most of what I know, when it comes to some of these practices is what I've learned in the research trials that I've been involved with, but also from the farmers like Josh Fankhauser and Ron Lamb with Lamb Farms, and many of the other farmers it's a peer support group that I work with who are always pushing the envelope when it comes to trying some of these innovative practices. And so again, almost all of what I've learned is from those research trials, as well as observing and learning from these guys that are on the bleeding edge of intercropping. And of course, we have so much great research across the prairies, both on farm and locations like the work that Lana Shaw has spearheaded in Saskatchewan with the agri-arm sites, Bill May, and we'll maybe talk a little bit about that. But I guess your group has really talked about this, but just to kind of review why intercrop, and she mentioned that whole concept of over yielding and the synergy compared to a single crop. When we talk about the land equivalent ratio, we're talking about can we get more yield when we combine these crops compared to a single crop. And at our Piola sites across the province, as she mentioned, we did see that from time to time. And definitely, if you look at a lot of the trials that have been done on this, it's not universal that you get that over yielding, but it's common where you get the over yielding. And we'll just recognize that is an opportunity, and it kind of covers some of the additional challenges and that we have with intercrops. There's this other idea, and I just touch on it here, and we'll come back to this a little bit, but it's this whole idea about complementary end use. And so we've got that legume combined often with a non-legume. So it's very seldom you'd have an intercrop, although there are instances where you see maybe two pulse crops together, but typically we're growing a legume with a non-legume. And part of the reason for that is that, the legume is fixing its own nitrogen, and we're taking advantage of that, obviously. And then that non-legume sometimes able to get some of that nitrogen benefit. And that's not always clear in terms of what those mechanisms are, but we do certainly recognize that some people would say that there is that complementary end use. A reduced disease and insect risk. Again, this is something that your group mentioned. The classic one is ascochyta blight in chickpea, and we'll use an example or talk a little bit about that. And just on the insect side, something like aphid in pea. And we know that if we have for example, an aphid infestation that might affect a pea or a lentil crop, when we have that combined with an intercrop, that it just seems like those aphids are getting a little bit confused in terms of what do we got here. And so there are benefits in terms of deferring some of those insect issues. Reduced lodging is an important one. And, when you think of this one, in terms of reduced lodging and improved harvestability, peas and lentils are an example where we're just, keeping some of those varieties that are a little bit more prone to lodging, we're keeping them up off the ground. And we'll talk about an example with the 4010 pea, one of the farmers that's doing an intercrop with the 4010 pea, which tends to be kind of a leafier pea, one that tends to not stand up very well. And of course, with lentils, if we can get those up off the ground with in an intercrop setting. The other really kind of classic example, and that's really not nothing to do with pulses, but we have farmers that over the years have routinely combined, say, for silage, like a barley and a triticale, a spring barley and a spring triticale, and basically using that triticale, which is more lodging resistant, to keep the barley from going down. And so we still see that practice used. I see it almost every year in the county of Lethbridgeshire and Feedlot Alley, where you've got these incredibly great conditions for growing a cereal crop, and to keep it from going flat, they'll put a little bit of triticale in there. So not just with their post-crop combinations. And of course, this other one, again, thinking here maybe in terms of something like a chickpea, where we're hastening crop maturity with something which is an indeterminate crop type. So can we take a chickpea and combine it with something like flax so that we push that maturity of the chickpea? In other words, if we're getting into the summer, we've got a 120-day crop, but it's also indeterminate, can even be a longer season crop. But if we've got something like flax in there, can we push that maturity so that we can perhaps move that where we're getting a good quality crop on a wet year or a wetter year, but also can we move that maybe from the brown soil zone, that chickpea, into the dark brown soil zone? So I think we're seeing some data and some examples of where that is in fact helping to move that into the wetter areas of the prairies. Weed suppression, I won't talk much about that, but obviously, I mean, if we've got something that's growing there, we've got increased ground cover, we're occupying that space that would normally perhaps be occupied by a weed. And so there certainly is, we might have more limited herbicides, but we may also have that weed suppression. Increased water use intensity, I mean, this one, not many people would say they're growing an intercrop for this reason, but certainly we know that if we got a deeper taproot crop with a more shallow rooted crop, obviously we're going to be able to use more, take advantage of more water. That might also relate back to the disease risk, right? Because sometimes if we can keep that soil a little bit drier during June, when we might have maybe more susceptibility to a root rot with a pea. And you do see that, I think, as a benefit in some of these situations. And then, of course, not to minimize the rotation or soil health benefits, the diversity. And by the way, Gabe said it was a good idea. So that whole thing, and this is just an example from the Peola site, plot to field, the APG Peola site up at Mosley, and this is on July 5th, and you can kind of see, here's our canola and our pea growing together. How much nitrogen is that, canola getting from the pea? We don't know. But again, it's just one of those things where one of the things we did see at the Mosley site this year when I was doing nodule assessment is that we had better nodule score in the Peola plots where we didn't apply any of the nitrogen. As your group mentioned, we had 0 nitrogen with pea and canola, and we had 50% of the Lano canola rate of nitrogen. So at that 50% rate, we had a little poor nodulation. And one of the things we know about pea, more so than perhaps the other pulse crops, but pea, if nitrogen's there, pea will go after it. Pea has a really quite an aggressive root system and a lot of quite a high root density, and so it'll use that nitrogen and not fix it if it has the chance. So this whole idea of reduced disease risk, just again, that growing the flax, and here we see a flax and a chickpea grown in alternate rows, and we know from data, Lana Shaw's work in Saskatchewan, work at, I think, Swift Current Research Center, and Bill May, some of the work in Saskatchewan that Bill is just in the process of publishing with chickpea flax and other crops too, but certainly that reduced ascochyta risk and reduction in generally reduction in the need for some of those pricey fungicide applications in a crop like chickpea with the combination of the two. This is just by way of example, your group, this you'll recognize this. Maybe this is Jason Saunders, and this was our lentil seeding rate trial in 2022. We had a fantastic lentil crop down southeast of Tabor at Jason's farm. We were looking at seeding rates for red lentil. That's the 20th of June. Here we are in early July. I think this was the 3rd of June. Jason up with his drone, and you can just see that terrible effect of root disease with 4 inches of rain in late June. This is a Phanomyces, and Jason on some of these fields, this is the 6th or 7th time that he said pulsing rotation, and so we see this Phanomyces is kind of building over the years. And so why do I mention this with respect to intercrop? Well, what Jason's idea is that he wants to be able to include lentils, for example, in rotation, but he's going to do it by trying with an intercrop. And this year, he intercropped, I think it was mustard. Yeah, it was mustard and green lentil. And I saw Josh, I saw your comment earlier on the mustard lentil and the challenge of cleaning, but this is mustard and green lentil. And so I think the idea and the concept here is that in these areas where the lentils aren't going to do well on a wetter year, then we know that the mustard will kick in. And in some of this other ground, we've got a little better chance for the lentil. So he's looking at it as an opportunity going forward to keep pulses in rotation, knowing that he has this issue with something like a Phanomyces. So again, the disease risk issue. This is just a photo of Lana Shaw's that I stole out of, I think it was Country Guide, but that whole idea of, pressing the maturity on these crops, a pure standard chickpea on the left and then the flax chickpea on the right. So again, just being able to push the maturity of these crops in the wetter years with an indeterminate crop or into areas of the dark brown soil zone. Intercropping will come in just to touch on a few of these, growing 2 or more crops at the same time, obviously. Which crops, which cultivars, those are questions that I think the practical side of many farmers that I have worked with or hearing, and so then there's always that, in general, in terms of which crops and cultivars, I think then you kind of think about picking which crop do I want to be the winner, and am I growing a particular cash crop that's the primary crop I'm after. And if I could use the example of a couple of the guys that I work with, they may say, okay, we want to grow a higher value pea, we want to grow a maple pea, and so then we're going to use something like a canola or a yellow mustard to support that maple pea, right? So we're going to, our intercrop of the mustard is there to provide in kind of a supportive nature, recognizing that in the areas of the field where for whatever reason, where that maple pea doesn't do particularly well, the mustard will take over and vice versa. So you've got that complementary nature. It's kind of a low input approach. We're not putting really any nitrogen out on that to support the mustard, but we're after that. We're after that pea crop and the mustard that's there. So we've got a decent pea crop, and then we've got the mustard as a bonus. This whole question about seeding, in terms of separate rows or mixtures, depending on the drill, some people don't have the option of separating those rows quite as easily. But in general, I think most people have kind of evolved towards separate rows. But mixtures work fine. And if you look at the research on this, generally speaking, if you've got something that can tolerate where you can get the proper depths with just one opener, then that works fine. And some people, where you've got, say, for example, a sideband where you're maybe putting one of the crops, like a pea, is going to go a little deeper in the sideband, and then you've got maybe the oilseed, for example, seeded more shallow. So seeding rates generally, you kind of, what are we, we're picking that winner. If we're saying we're after a pea crop, we're probably going to seed 2/3 or 3/4 of the rate of the pea. And then we're going to keep that canola or mustard at maybe half rate, right? It's there kind of in a supportive role. Seeding dates, we'll kind of skip over that one a little bit, but generally, depending on the combination and, you're probably not looking at dates that would be all that different from what we do with a monocrop. What's the optimum fertility? Gilles talked about that. Do we feed the oilseed at the expense of a pulse nodulation and fixation of nitrogen? And so, what's the optimum fertility? That was one of the motivations in the Piola trial, was to maybe answer one of those questions with respect to how much nitrogen do we need to put with canola. Harvest, how to harvest. These are questions that many of the farmers I work with have been able to sort over time, and there's a lot of practical experience, but basically we're combining these crops together, obviously, and the settings, there's a lot of good information out there in terms of the settings, but I know a number of the farmers I work with are using, stripper headers, and they're finding that it works quite nicely with their intercrops. Controlling weeds, again, some challenges there with the herbicide choices that we have. We're taking generally kind of a lower input approach often with these intercrops compared to what we would if we were growing these crops as a monocrop. But we'll talk about some of the examples of the weed control packages that people are using, and we can open it up to questions there. There's probably a lot of great knowledge in the group on that with the folks that are on the webinar here today. Impact on diseases. This is a big question that when we think of implications for the frequency of growing an oilseed like a mustard or a canola with respect to clubroot, right? Or we know about aphanomyces. So how often can we grow, a crop that's susceptible to aphanomyces without running into a wreck down the road? So this whole thing about impact on diseases, we need to be thinking about rotation break in the context of, and obviously people are growing like we talked earlier, trying to combine these, something like a chickpea and a flax to mitigate the impact of something like a ascochyta. And the will it pay? Yeah, important. Dr. Eric Bremer did some really good studies here in the last 5 years, probably from about, I think it was around 2018 to 2021-22. And this is just one of his sites where he was looking at lentil mustard and pea mustard combinations. And what Eric did was he used labeled nitrogen to be able to look at the whole nitrogen dynamic associated with the uptake of the non-legume component. In this case, it was either canola or mustard with lentil and pea. One of the things that he found in that study was that peas are really pretty good at scavenging nitrogen if it's there, whereas a crop like lentil doesn't really. And it has a lot to do with just the more aggressive rooting system of a pea versus a lentil. But there's some really good work that was done that those studies are published. Our Mosley site for the Piola trial, that's with Doug Clements, and here we are seeding that with this John Deere drill. In this case, what we've done is we've combined the canola and the peas seeded at a compromised depth. So we're seeding about just around 1.25 1.5 inches in strip stubble, and then we've got a little bit of phosphorus fertilizer or the nitrogen for the 50% rate of nitrogen going through the net row band for that particular trial. Here's that site in early July, Piola on the left, canola on the right. This would be the zero nitrogen canola Piola on the left. And then, of course, we're full rate nitrogen for canola on the right. here we are looking at that a week later. So our canola is coming along nicely. About August 23rd, our peas are being harvested. We had some really wild weather at that site, and just before pea harvest, actually, we had there's probably about 25% hail damage on this site. So that was unfortunate, but he's coming through with the stripper header on the peas. And our canola and the piola reached maturity about 2.5 weeks later. So this is one of the issues, one of the challenges with these systems, is that to match the maturity. And in this case, you've got something like a canola, even though it's a pod shatter resistant canola hybrid that we have there, because of the hail damage on that site in the hail, we did lose some canola. So I think we had about a 30 bushel canola crop when we harvested this. The peas that we showed earlier went around just in the high 40s, around 49 bushels, about a 30 bushel canola crop in weight. By the time we got around to harvesting the canola and the piola, we had some loss on the canola, some loss on the peas because of the combined effects of the hail damage. So we, again, I think it was around a 45 bushel yield for the combination. This is just another example by way, just for discussion purposes, but this is up at Lowland. This is a 40-10 pea and yellow mustard. And so 50% rate of yellow mustard, 75% of the pea. And part of the reason I had this slide, if you look in the background, that's authority injury as we go up in kind of the more upslope position. And so where the farmer was using authority here for weed control on this site. And mustard does tolerate authority, but we did have some injury there. That was we've learned that if we're going to do this, we have to keep the authority down at relatively low rates to make this work. Josh, here's a picture of I'm pretty sure this is harvesting maple pea mustard over at your farm there. Does that seem right, or is that a chickpea? This may be chickpea flax, sorry. I might have got the wrong photo there, but we'll maybe skip over that one. But I do have a picture of Kevin Oak's chickpea flax. This is at Carmen Gay. Kevin Oak has been growing chickpea flax under irrigation, and he's kind of been comparing that to straight flax compared to the chickpea flax, and he's kind of migrating toward having chickpea flax in rotation, and it's been working reasonably well. He puts the chickpea and the flax together. Josh, on the right-hand side, I think I got that right. Josh alternating 10-inch rows of chickpea and flax. And I think chickpea at a full seed rate, so probably aiming for about 3 to 4 plants per square foot. And I think flax at about 1/3, if I got that correct. And here we're looking at that in kind of early September, just as things were. The flax was almost wanting to start to regrow a little bit in the fall here, but I think that ended up getting redloaned in early October this year. I had to throw this one in too because, yeah, I mean, we can even combine like a maple pea and barley, and a couple of the farmers that they work with, including I think Josh, tried this, and I think that was Josh's trying to clean the barley and the maple pea, and that can be a real challenge. And that's one of the things that can be the Achilles heel of some of these combinations. One of the farmers I work with, he was trying to grow a milling oat with peas, and the crop just looked fantastic. It was beautiful, except there was no way we could get the split pea out of the oat. And so that kind of, I mean, I think, it's not that these are new things that, we're kind of having to relearn some of these things. What can we clean? What can't we clean out? Because we know we can grow these things together, but what can we actually clean out? And so I'm going to stop there after about 20 minutes. And I need to stop share.
Thanks, Rob. I'm just...
Yeah.
There we go. We've got Josh.
Well, Josh, you could talk all day about intercrops.
That's his forte, isn't it?
It is. Josh, if you want to unmute, if you have any thoughts that
There you go. You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good. Sorry about that. Got in late last night. I guess that intercropping made me so much money I could finally have a vacation after however long. So
Good deal. Josh, do you want to take a minute and introduce yourself and where you farm and your experience with intercrops?
well, I don't really want to steal the show. I was just stalking Rob. So we work with Rob. We farm in Clare's home. So just a little bit between Calgary and Lethbridge, and I've been playing with it for, I don't know, 10-ish years, and we're pretty much an intercrop farm. Like 2/3 of all the pulses are intercrop now. So they've been playing with that and lots of combos, and it's kind of separating is kind of our limiting capacity. So that turned into a whole other business and a whole other kettle of fish. So that's another slideshow. But yeah, so we were playing, and Rob stole some of my pictures, which was fine. So because I texted him pictures. So yeah, you did get that wrong, Rob. That was our employees combining our chickpea flax, because we found with the shell-borne stripper headers we lost too many chickpeas, but so we switched to draper headers for that. So yeah, but that's kind of what I got. We've been doing a lot.
Sounds like you volunteered to do another talk. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Send me an email. You still have it. So if not, Rob will send it.
I do. That sounds good. We have a question for you guys. Can you spray authority on mustard?
Yes, I think it's even on the label now. It used to not be, but it works.
It's at the lower rate of authority, and again, you want to watch. You get those late, sort of you get the authority on, and then it's a little bit dry, and then you get that rain in our, say, lower organic matter soil types, and then you have to kind of expect a little bit of injury, and the crop almost always comes back.
Is that the case when there's drought as well, Rob? If it's like there's not enough rain, would you still?
Yeah, often, and so that's going on kind of before planting or before crop emergence. So you're kind of saying, okay, when it rains, we know it's going to activate that product, and it's just sometimes that sensitive stage when the crop is at that particular sensitive stage. But you're still really liking the weed control that you get for something like a kochia and mustard, for example, and definitely that's a real gem, that particular combination for for something like a pea mustard. People are using, I think Edge is another one. Josh, do you guys use Edge, or using?
Usually our standard pea pulse, standard pea mustard plan is, or canola mustard is, we go in with Edge in the fall. We like fall Edge because we think the snows and the winds and the rain help move it in the soil, because we're no-till, and it, rather than work it in. They did change that label too, but we found if we can get her down, we actually put the last of it down before the snowstorm. And so usually we'll do Edge in the fall, or spring can work, and then we'll go with authority and a glyphosate, maybe an AIM or some contact, depending on bromoxynil in the spring, and away we go. That's kind of the plan. And the other thing with the authority is, even if it does bang up your mustard in those situations Rob was talking about, or your canola, your peas will compensate. So it's not quite like in a monocrop situation where when you damage it, you get nothing, or you get stunted. And sometimes with some of this, use your own risk when off-label. But sometimes with this off-label stuff, you got to remember, well, if I bang it up a little bit, well, the other crop might compensate, right? So we had that on something that was pretty pushing the limit. So I'm not even going to talk about that here and get somebody else in trouble. So we've had it a few times.
We had a comment in the chat from Tyler that authority and mustard get along much better if you put the authority down in the fall. Practically no injury that way.
Makes sense. Yep.
Yeah. Tyler also had a question asking Josh if he could comment on stripper headers and peas. He says he's been scared.
No. Oh, that's been a Twitter discussion, but I'm not on Twitter much anymore. when I was a kid, because we've had stripper headers for a very long time. So I guess, yeah, when I remember the drapers, but we literally bought our stripper header for peas. And then for a long time, we used it, a couple of years, we used it only on peas, and then we switched to everything. So we use them on peas. But stripper headers, what you got to remember is they like a wall of material to push against. So you kind of have a wall of material, you have a lot less losses. So actually in intercrops, we're noticing less losses because you got more general biomass. And that was the problem we hit with the chickpeas and chickpeas are just a higher value pulse. So the chickpeas and flax, you don't have quite the biomass. And that was kind of the problem with the high losses. It works. But yeah, I think with straight yellow peas, we've had lots of good luck with monocrop on yellow peas. And I'd say better luck on intercrop. And it's been, yeah, we have no trouble with it. And I like the stubble. So I am willing to kiss a few dollars away. Like when we're looking at the losses versus maybe a draper header, I am willing to kiss another bushel on the ground. Doesn't really bother me if we catch more snow, because you got to kind of think next year. So we actually did some strips this year where we tried draper header versus stripper header on the chickpeas. And I think Rob just got the chickpea picture. So anyways.
Fred wanted to know, what herbicides would you recommend on oat and flax and on millet and clover?
Whoa. Oat and flax.
Oat, and that was an oat and flax?
Yeah, oat and flax and on millet and clover.
Yeah, like in an oat and flax, and I'm trying to remember if we can use, because we don't grow a lot of oats down here. I should know this, but it's something like, is a Buctril M okay for oats? The MCPA ester? Because the bermoxanil would be okay, but we'd have to check that. I mean, so.
Yeah, that's one of the things. You kind of have to go to the blue book and fill in the blanks. So you kind of go in the blue book for both crops and fill in the blanks. And I know like on flax, this is again off label, but I know because we grow a lot of monocrop flax, anything without fluroxypore doesn't seem to kill it, right? So like a straight, a lot of those chems, so if you use a lot of the older, weaker chemistries, it probably is off label, but you probably won't kill your flax. But then you got marketing issues to worry about too. So you got to really think some of these things through.
Yeah. Bermoxanil is generally safe on everything, and it's probably okay. Just whether you'd have that group for, the phenoxy would be from the MCP ester in terms of safety on flax, but I'm not sure on. I know MCP amine on oats is okay. I just don't know about the ester.
Yeah, so that's the only one I can think of. And I see a comment about was it Veraxor or
Veraxor, pea barley. That's an interesting one.
Volterra. Well, that's actually good to know. I'm actually going to write that in my front end of my blue book with all my stuff. But yeah, so thanks for that. Could be helpful. But sorry, I got off a plane at 3 a.m. That's why. So if I'm slow, the Volterra, fall applied Volterra on barley pea works really good, as does Bazagran on barley pea. So those are. But I don't know if Rob.
No, that makes sense in terms of safety there. And it with the pea barley, Josh, I mean, are we tending to sell that as a mixed grain then? Or how have you been marketing the pea barley?
Well, I did oat barley this last year because the oats were lighter. Like we've had a lot of trouble separating to a high standard the pulse cereal. It's just really slow and a lot of reliance on the gravity table to do it. And it just slows down in your high volume. You grow 100, like if you're growing 35 or 40 bushel maple mustard, let's say, and then you grow 100 bushel pea barley combo, it just creates a lot of time in the seed plant. So the separation cost, I don't know if it's more, it just becomes more of a pain in the neck. And so I know like my brother-in-law in Europe, they do a lot of yellow pea barley for their dairy. So they'll grow yellow pea barley, combine it together, and then feed it as a whole mix. So if you're feeding it to your own cows, it'll be an issue. The feedlots down here wanted to take some dockage to do that because they could. So we were growing a maple pea with our barley. So we separated it because maples are worth a lot of money. But it was a slow process, and to get it up to spec was hard. So
Yeah.
you could do mixed. If you knew you were going to feed your own cows, I would do mixed. Mixed yellow and barley would work really well together, actually.
We have
Yeah,
a
you could.
producer, one of our living lab producers, up by Barhead, and that's what he's doing. He's doing a OP, and then he puts it into his creep feeders for his calves, and he says works really well.
Yeah. And that would also be a good combo because we're also in the cow business. We have quite some cow calf, and so we have some pivots, and we always grow barley under a pivot to silage it. And we like barley because if we get a lot of rain and a lot of grass, we can just turn the combines on it. So the that combo would also work good both ways. That's what we've discussed. So it is a combo where you could intercrop, but if you wanted a silage with a little higher protein and maybe a little volume for like your silage bit, and if plans change, you could combine it and use it. So that does have some advantages. So
I got a comment using pea barley mix to supplement on chaff piles.
Could work. Yeah, with chaff, we did that a long time ago again when I was a kid, and yeah, that's a good way to feed cows. One thing that's a interesting byproduct of our flax chickpeas is we ended up, just the way the combines were set, I'm going to make some different changes next year maybe, but we ended up with a lot of chickpea chaff in our mix. So I have, it's not a weight thing, because it's, it doesn't weigh up, but in terms of volume, I think I got 10,000 bushels of chickpea chaff sitting in bins right now that we're mixing out with other rations to try to use up the cows. And it's making great feed and the cows love it, but yeah, it's a lot of volume. So that's an interesting byproduct too. So that's one of the things when you get further down the road and you're thinking of seed cleaning facilities, you need to think about your byproducts, because what you do with those byproducts dramatically will affect the whole profitability of the seed plant. And when I first went down that road on the seed plants, they said, whatever you do with your byproducts is kind of your profit. All your operating costs are kind of out of the other fund. And I'm kind of like, nah. And yeah, there's quite a bit of profit in the screening. So you got to figure out how to handle those and what you're going to do and what those mechanisms to get rid of them. So like if you're a straight grain farm, you better think about how you're going to get rid of it and not lose too much value, because I am a cow guy, so I can say that we're great at buying things too cheap, right, from the grain guys. So anyways, there's another tangent, another presentation if you want to go down that road.
Yep, sounds good. Signed you up. Would it not, so Fred wants to know, would it not make sense to do a strip of 120% of, he's saying normal canola rate? We all want to use less, but does it economically make sense? And he says he's talking about fertility.
Let me just, I'm looking for that question. I don't see it, but can you run that by me again?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it popped in during your group's part. So would it not make sense to do a strip with 120% of the normal canola rate? We all want to use less, but does it economically make sense?
Maybe if he can elaborate, what I'm getting out of it is that they want to do 120% of a sole canola strip. But how does that work for fertility? I didn't quite get the gist of the question.
For sure, Fred. If you're still on, if you want to maybe type a clarification in, and then we have one other question. And a reminder, if you're on here with us, if you have questions, pop them into the chat or into the Q&A. And someone wanted to know why you wouldn't, why not scalp the barley off and then run through a color sorter to finish?
Yes, that would work. My plant doesn't have a color sorter yet, because to keep up with the volume that I want to run, it's like that's expensive. Just seed plants they're like combines. There's every value for every guy. So
yeah.
And spiral might work too. So yeah, I've just got, we don't have a color sorter yet. Let's put it that way. But there's a slot for it, and I have quotes sitting on my desk. When I pull the trigger is another question. But yeah. But again, it's just a cost thing, right? So like yellow peas at $10 and barley at whatever, $6. It's a math question really on whether it's worth running through the color sorter, right? So if that makes sense. So It probably works. I think it works with a high value pea. I'm not sure yellow pea and a barley would work economically. Agronomically, they would work great. Does that answer the question?
Yep, I think so. Fred would like to know if it would make sense to try and fertilize a pea canola with 120% of the normal rate. So I guess if you increased your canola seeding
Yeah.
rate to fertilize the pea.
Okay, and maybe I'm wondering if maybe the idea there, Fred, is that why wasn't that part of the mix? You know, why did we, for example, in the Piola trail, you sort of say, oh man, we've only got so many treatments, so we need the mono P, which is probably going to be pretty low and basically no N.
Yeah.
And then the canola, which we said, okay, we went with the recommended rate from Element Labs in Edmonton said, you know, based on our soil test, how much N do we need? That's what we put on the canola. And then we did the 50% versus the no N with the Piola combination. But, you know, if you, in a perfect world, you'd have 5 treatments and then you go with maybe 100% N or even 120% for that matter on the Piola to say what happens if we really drive the nitrogen on that. So, I mean, these are, and believe it or not, those kind of treatments are there in the literature because researchers have the ability in small plot trials to try all those different combinations where you go with 100% rates of, again, and I'm not sure I'm answering your question exactly, but part of it is just, you know, if we, you could go, you can do the combination where you've got a full seeding rate of canola or even a higher seeding rate of canola. And of course, those nitrogen rates and a lot of that work has been done. And I think what they've kind of arrived at is that when you get, we get too much canola because of its competitiveness, it just drives to the point where there's very little pulse, very little pulse in the mix. Your group maybe has a comment on that?
Not really. I'm just thinking like it always comes down to economics, right? Of that particular year too. What are the peas selling for? What's the canola selling for? How you want to do 120% of something, then you need to account for the input cost. I think that's complicated.
Yeah. One of the things that the researchers have found with the flax chickpea, if we could use that as a, you know, not that there's many maybe chickpea growers on the call today, but I mean, as soon as you get flax much over about 1/3 of the rate, or I think that the rule of thumb was sort of around 15 plants per square foot, you know, which is normally we'd target maybe 450 or even sometimes 600 per square foot, 60 rather per square foot. So you're down at about 1/3. When you get above that, the flax just almost wipes out the chickpea. Like it's really hard to get. You might have a little bit of chickpea in a flax crop, but but you're not going to have much chickpea. And of course, you've got a chickpea that's extremely high value. You don't want to compromise the yield there. So
makes sense. Chris wants to confirm that Basagran has been used safely on barley.
I think it's registered. I just saw that question. I'm 98% sure it's registered. Please check your blue book. I've done it. It worked good. So,
yeah.
It's expensive though. It's one of the more expensive. Great chem. I love it. It's been for certain things. I think like even spot spraying in our like flax chickpea. I think it'll maybe work in some applications, but yeah, I think we're going to be using it a little more.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of expensive. So.
Like the Viper combination is so nice because you sort of get the Basagran at a little bit of a reduced rate there. When but boy, I don't know what the price of straight Basagran is, but if it ever got a little less expensive, then, just a pricing thing, it would be used a lot more, I think.
Yeah, and I know it's not registered on chickpeas, but some of the chickpeas we've had got pretty thistly, so we're spot spraying with Curtail M, our flax chickpeas, and then you completely wipe out the chickpeas. So next time I was maybe going to try Basagran and see if it bangs the chickpeas up less. It's not registered. And again, now you got marketing issues, and especially you really have to be careful with those higher value crops like the maple peas and the chickpeas. There's not much of a feed outlet, and you can be going into some markets that are really sensitive. So like combine those spots separately, or like talk to your buyers. Just be careful with off-registered stuff. You really gotta, it's at your own risk. So just be very careful. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
Yes. Maybe the
Yeah,
buyer
and
doesn't want Bazagran or
the-
MRLs, and right.
that's right. The buyers and the buyers do check on these things too. And I got a call from a friend of ours, Josh, whose name we won't mention, but he was selling some crop, and they found it was an organic crop grain, and the buyer found the active ingredient that is in I've just drawn a blank here, but it's what's our grasshopper herbicide that's got nice residual?
Silent or lower span.
No, the safe one.
Coragen.
Yeah, Coragen. The active ingredient in Coragen showed up in organic grain that he was selling. And of course, everybody in the neighborhood, all his neighbors were spraying for grasshoppers. And so it showed up. And so what I was amazed that the end use market, was actually checking for those things, and that's amazing, the analytical power now to be able to check for these things. And so you really put yourself at risk with, as you say, with something like a Bazagran in a chickpea or a maple pea or something, so.
Well, that's the thing we have to be very careful.
The Bazagran.
The MRL issue is it's not just one person that gets affected, it's the whole load that was on that shipment that will give rise to
Ouch.
it.
Yes.
Yeah, one decision can change other decisions as well and affect a bigger amount of people than we originally think.
Yep.
So
Right. So
Larry wants to use fall rye for weed control between rows and organic alfalfa seed. Will the fall rye access the fixed nitrogen or the nitrogen fixed by the alfalfa, or do I need to add manure?
I could just comment. I mean, that's an interesting one, and there's been some work done on that. So something like an alfalfa does shed some nitrogen to, say, a perennial crop. And so I think with rye being such an aggressive root system, that I think that there's a possibility that it would be able to access some of that nitrogen that's kind of being shed from the alfalfa.
well, I was thinking being a taproot system, it will definitely suck up some of the nitrogen for sure.
Yeah. Well, if I understand his question, there's your group. He's thinking about would the alfalfa benefit from the nitrogen from the alfalfa? It's possible, but to be real honest, the general selfishness of plants is such that if it was a perennial, say like a perennial grass with that rye well established, but for a rye with that, trying to establish and find some nitrogen, that might be a bit challenging.
Does rye not have an allelopathical, like they can interfere with, especially once they're in the growing stage, they can interfere with other plants?
Yep. And so it would, so rye, once it gets rolling, rye can have an allelopathic effect on, more so on other, say, species that would want to germinate into that rye, as opposed to, something like if we're talking about established alfalfa. Now, if we're thinking about establishing them at the same time, I think it's pretty much that the alfalfa wouldn't be, as a seedling, wouldn't be, providing any nitrogen, but that perennial standard alfalfa may supply some. But I would be thinking about the manure application, to augment that nitrogen supply for the rye, to be able to get any biomass there.
Would you recommend soil sampling to make that?
Yeah, if you soil sample, that'll tell you. You know what I found with perennials? It's predictably low available nitrogen at any point in time, and because the nitrogen is tied up in the root system in the biomass, and there's always something kind of growing there, and so you very seldom find something in a soil test. So you might go out and soil test it, but you could almost fairly predict that it would be quite low. A lot of times when you're sampling something like alfalfa, you're really after finding out what the potassium and the phosphorus is as opposed to the nitrogen. But it's not that the nitrogen wouldn't be there to a certain extent, but as soon as it becomes available, it's mopped back up by the alfalfa. And so it's competing with that rise. So you provide some supplemental nitrogen in the form of manure in an organic system to try and give that rye a chance to get it kick-started.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I guess I'm going to ask each of you one last question for finishing the webinar up and a thank you. What would be the biggest tip, trick, or thought you'd have for folks who are considering intercropping? And I guess your group, do you want to start?
Just don't underestimate the power of leaving nitrogen. So I think if that's the case, but it's not for everybody. Intercropping is not meant to work for everybody. Somebody like Josh might be very successful with it. However, from data, it's not like a solid benefit that will happen on all across soil systems and everything. So I think it's very micro environment would be something that you want to test first and then put your bang on this side of things. Otherwise, it's a costly affair. And if not done properly and, Mother Nature doesn't cooperate, you could lose a lot of dollars. So a caution tale right there.
Rob, do you want to add to that?
Sure. And I think just recognize that if you're intercropping, even though intercropping's been around for a long period of time, you're still you're probably on the leading edge, and maybe Josh would argue on the bleeding edge at times, to figure out what works on your farm. And, the amazing thing about, Josh and Ron and the folks at Lamb Farms is that they recognize that this is a really good fit for us in terms of livestock, in terms of the grain. And it's something that they've invested now in the seed cleaning facility. And so they're kind of all in. But again, as the group said, it's still relatively a niche and it's relatively leading edge. And I think the opportunities, are really, really great. When nitrogen's $1 a pound, it looks a lot better than when nitrogen's at 50 cents a pound. But I think there's some really, it's something that people are going to continue to look at and look at adapting to their farm.
Awesome. Josh?
Oh, yeah. So hopefully I make sense because, it was a 3 o'clock in the morning flight when I got home last night. So, I think the one thing, we didn't just get there overnight, right? Like we started with 40 acres of yellow peas and canola, and then it kind of just kept evolving. So don't think that you got to get to where we got overnight because you won't. And we've had some stinkers. There's some combos that you just won't do. Like, I'm pretty sure it was a typo in your slide group, and I don't want to belittle you, I don't mean it as any offense. But I think there was something about flax and mustard. No, we're having a lot of troubles getting getting canola volunteers and mustard volunteers out of our intercrop flax now. They just don't separate well, right? So things like that, I never thought it'd be a problem. Then all of a sudden you get these canola volunteers in your flax, and you're like, oh, that doesn't matter. Well, it starts to matter, especially in the markets you're going to. But kind of the biggest thing I've learned, when nitrogen gets expensive, yes, and in the organic systems, definitely. But what I've really learned with intercropping, if it's going to work for you, you kind of have to be trying to solve a problem. Like, I'm not sure, honestly, that a yellow pea and a Argentine canola are going to work economically. They're fun to play with. They're a lot of fun to learn and to kind of play around with. But time you add separation and hassle costs and some different weed control, the economics get pretty skinny on it pretty quick. So that's just kind of the don't think it's a get rich quick scheme. You really got to watch your math. And like the barley pea, we just had a discussion as a business group because I farm with a bunch of partners, and it's like, no, I don't think we're going to be doing that right now, because even like these cereal peas, the separation costs, as I kind of alluded to, just get you, right? And it works really well agronomically, but you got to start watching the costs and trying to figure out the costs. I know the Living Lab, some of their presentations on the cattle side would try to figure out your costs, and it's not quite as easy as you think, right? So it's been a lot of fun. And yeah, like Rob, he alluded to the disease control and the weed that Jason's going through. And I think that's great. It's going to work for that. And I mean, we can't grow chickpeas here because of the maturity issues. We're a little too wet and too cool. So I throw some flax in and looks like that's working, but we're solving agronomic issues. And we've gone into growing peas that are a little bit less standability, but maybe worth a little bit more. There's a number of kinds of specialty peas, and then we use the mustard to hold them up. So we're using it to solve agronomic issues. But then again, that also leads to smaller markets, harder MRLs, and it's just more fun. So I don't know. That's kind of the mechanical issues. There's always a few. That's a whole other webinar. But farmers are industrious, and you kind of figure out what works for you. I mean, we started with a rotary screen and a bunch of homemade augers, and now we got a bunch of homemade seed plants. So it's just, you'll kind of start small and figure out if you like it. And if you're kind of passionate about it, you'll find it. And it works good with livestock. I mean, that was honestly the big secret to everything we did, because we have a pretty significant cow herd. And if any of these combos didn't separate or went completely stupid or weedy, we can just push we're going to silage it off, or, we're going to dump it down our cows, even if it's a mixed grain. So we
feed your way out.
We had a backup plan, right? So we have some advantages that admittedly many don't, right? So
Perfect. Thank you, all three of you. That's excellent advice. I don't see any more questions. So thank you all for your time, and thanks to our audience for joining us. We did record the session, so we'll post it on the YouTube channel. I'll send everyone an email after it's posted and let everyone know. Thanks, guys. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
yes,
You too.
thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Bye for now.